Good evening. Welcome to News Plus here on Loveworld USA. I'm TGK Andre. Let's take a quick look at the top headline stories this evening. April declared the month of favors. U.S. revokes South Sudan visas in retaliation for deportation refusals, citing national security concerns. Protests erupt nationwide as thousands rally against Trump and Musk in hands-off movement. Iran's currency crashes to record low amid Trump's renewed sanctions and regional tensions. These and more stories in the news. Pastor Chris Yakalome, DSC-DD, has declared the month of April as the month of favors, urging Christians worldwide to be vessels of kindness and channels of divine grace. Speaking during a recent service, Pastor Chris emphasized that God is looking for someone through whom he can show favor, and he desires to bless others through his people. This is the month where God is causing favors to come upon his people, Pastor Chris said. But more than that, God wants to cause favor through you. You become the hand of God when you show favor to others. He called on believers not just to expect blessings, but to actively become a blessing. God is looking for someone to show kindness. Will you be that person? He asked. As you favor people, you become a divine instrument. You become God's outstretched arm to those around you. In a world full of need, the message of April being a month of favors is a timely call to action for generosity, for compassion, and for a divine partnership. Pastor Chris encouraged Christians to look for opportunities each day to bless someone in need, reminding them that when they do, they mirror the heart of God and position themselves to receive even greater favor. This is your time, he declared. Be a miracle in someone's life and watch how God causes favor to overflow in yours. Watch this.
The God factor in Joseph's life. Whatever he did, every effort of his, God made it to prosper. God made him a success. This month, I said it's a very, very special and beautiful month for you because it is the month of favors. It's the month of favors. Divine favors. God is like, when David became king, he says, isn't there anybody in the house of Saul that I might show covenant kindness? God's looking for, hey, I want to bless somebody. I want to bless somebody. I want to bless someone with the kindness of God. And I want you to think like this. Think like this. You are going to step into that role of looking for somebody to bless. You're looking for somebody to bless. As God's looking for somebody to bless. So he's looking for somebody to bless through you. You see that? So you're looking around. You want to bless someone because God wants to bless someone through you. And let me tell you something. You cannot think that way and act that way without finding out that God is pouring so much into your life. You will be so favored and favored and favored. I think some of you, your prayers will change this month. You're going to say, oh Lord, I'm so blessed, I'm embarrassed. I'm going to embarrass you with blessings. So much favors. He just keeps singling you out for favors. Like you're the only one there. He'll single you out for favors. Yes, this April, your month of favors. Thank you, Lord. Go ahead and praise him and thank him. Glorify his name. Honor him.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio has announced that the United States is revoking all visas currently held by South Sudanese nationals and halting the issuance of new ones, citing South Sudan's failure to accept deported citizens from the U.S. Rubio said the transitional government in Juba had repeatedly failed to comply with international repatriation standards, accusing it of taking advantage of American immigration laws. The visa revocation takes immediate effect and will remain in place until South Sudan fully cooperates with U.S. removal efforts. The move comes amid growing instability in South Sudan, where renewed clashes and humanitarian crises have put the country on the brink of civil war. This latest step follows the Trump administration's termination of temporary protected status for Venezuelans earlier this year and its broader effort to enforce immigration laws more stringently. More than 100,000 illegal migrants have reportedly been deported since January, according to Department of Homeland Security sources. Rubio signaled that the U.S. is prepared to revisit the visa ban only if South Sudan meets its repatriation obligations fully and without delay. So looking at the situation involving South Sudan, it's clearly a case of ensuring that the best people, like the president said in his first tenure and his second, that, these countries need to bring their best or the best. And if the countries aren't willing to take back their criminals, then how can we ensure that they're not also bringing their criminals? So it's a situation where if, we've allowed people into the country and now we've deemed that we've allowed them in incorrectly because, hey, they're not aiding the general peace or they're causing more harm than they're worth, that we try to send them back to the country that they came from on a visa, and you're not allowing them, then that means that for some reason, you as a government don't support the general well-being of the American public. Meaning that if that's the case, we can't ensure that your embassies, that the people who process and allow these visas, that the government who processes and allows these visas, that ultimately get approved by the United States, are doing any part in actually actively verifying the status of these people, whether they're good people or not, whether they fit the moral scope of the United States. So the best thing, all in all, is just to keep them away from the United States, at least until some form of compliance is being made. Because at the end of the day, you have to focus on the security of your country first, especially if other countries are bringing in people who may jeopardize that security as a whole. So hopefully South Sudan does go back on their deportation rejections, and we see that the visas come back, because of course not everybody who's coming from South Sudan is the worst of the worst or a criminal, but right now, again, as we've seen time and time again, President Trump is taking no half measures in ensuring the protection and prosperity of the nation. Thousands of Americans rallied across all 50 states Saturday in opposition to several key policies of the Trump administration, decrying what they called federal overreach and disregard for working Americans. The hands-off movement, a coordinated protest involving more than 1,200 rallies, saw the largest turnout at the National Mall in Washington, D.C., with sizable demonstrations also reported in New York, Cleveland, Philadelphia, and Lansing. Protesters voiced opposition to the Trump administration's Department of Government Efficiency, downsizing, reciprocal tariffs, immigration reform, and cuts to diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Demonstrators also carried signs denouncing Musk's growing influence within DOGE, holding him partly responsible for government layoffs and surveillance proposals. Some dressed in dystopian-themed outfits referencing The Handmaid's Tale, symbolizing what they see as a rollback of civil liberties under the Trump-Musk alliance. In response, the White House defended its policies, stating President Trump will always protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid for eligible Americans. The Democrats, on the other hand, want to extend these benefits to illegal immigrants, a move that would bankrupt these programs. Despite the intensity of the demonstrations, the National Park Service confirmed the protests remained peaceful. Notably, The protests followed recent attacks on Tesla properties in at least 9 states. The FBI has urged the public to remain vigilant, linking the incidents, including arson and vandalism, to growing anti-Musk sentiment fueled by Doge's federal actions. Again, as we've stated on Loveworld USA time and time again, protesting is an act that is protected and almost promoted by the First Amendment. Of course, when the protests are peaceful, not when people are planting incendiary devices at Tesla showrooms, not when people are vandalizing property, not when people are rioting, not when people are looting, but when people come out in one voice, in unity, and in peace. Yes, you can disrupt the normal order by walking along the streets and forcing people, in their vehicles to take a different route. If you didn't know, that was what happened during the civil rights marches. They weren't just marching for a reason. When they went to diners and they performed sit-ins, they were there to disrupt business. When you have thousands of people marching in the streets, you can't drive on the streets, meaning you have to take different routes, which causes issues, which leads to the government, stepping up to do something when they've reached enough complaints. So there's nothing wrong with disrupting regular flow during a protest. It's just about when you end up destroying things that's either private or public property that benefits nobody, especially if it's a neighborhood that you live in. So, of course, it wouldn't be everybody that agrees with the Trump administration's handling of things, but it's good to see that we can all agree that they're handling it right in the way that they're going about voicing their displeasure. Because at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, and if you don't like it, unfortunately, it's still going to happen because he's in office and his party is also the majority, in the U.S. government. It's good to see that, unlike what we've seen before with a lot of vandalism and a lot of destruction, that the good people of the United States of America can come out in one voice and peacefully present their displeasure in public. Iran's national currency, the rial, plunged to historic low over the weekend, trading at 1,043,000 to the US dollar, a stark indicator of the growing economic pressure facing the Islamic Republic under renewed US sanctions and intensifying geopolitical instability. The collapse comes on the heels of President Donald Trump's formal reinstatement of his administration's maximum pressure policy towards Iran, codified in a National Security Presidential Memorandum issued in February. The directive seeks to block Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, restrict its oil exports, and disrupt its financial networks believed to be funding designated terrorist groups such as Hamas and Hezbollah. In Tehran, confusion and panic gripped currency markets after Nowruz, the Persian New Year celebrations, during which formal trading paused and only informal exchange markets remained active. Money changers in the capital either switched off digital rate displays or stopped trading altogether as the rial's value nosedived. The Treasury Department has since announced expanded sanctions targeting a network allegedly responsible for funneling Iranian crude oil to China, one of Tehran's last remaining lifelines. According to officials, these oil revenues are being used to finance proxy militias and terror organizations across the Middle East. With the rial losing nearly half its value since President Masoud Pezeshkian took office in July 2024, Iran's economic crisis appears to be deepening, and with tensions mounting, observers warn of further financial and political volatility in the weeks ahead. What we're seeing, as we've reported on Loveworld USA, is the fact that Iran, who's been claiming that they've been enriching their uranium for peace, has, by, again, global, nuclear watchdogs, come close to the state of reaching weapons-grade uranium enrichment. And just to explain it again, there's a type of enriching that you can do with uranium that it can be used for things like nuclear fission, to generate power through a nuclear power plant, or if you need, it for different medical uses. But then there's a level that it gets to where at this point, the uranium has been enriched so much that there is only, and again, I say that there's only one reason it can be used, and that is for weapons-grade capabilities. In other words, a nuclear bomb. And the United States, along with other countries, have been trying to put a stop to this because Iran has been known, to wave their military capacity around like a bank robber inside of a bank, pretty much, sending threats to different countries around the region and sending threats to the United States. Again, we have to be reminded of how President Trump, when he stepped in office, one of the first things he did say was that if he was assassinated by Iran, he had a plan in place, meaning that he had received intelligence that there was something like that going on in the works. So again, that is the primary purpose for the U.S. passing this maximum pressure sanctions, aiming to cripple Iran's ability to produce nuclear weaponry. We will take a break, and when we return, we'll take a look at some of the stories that made the headlines this week.
This is one of the most important days, in my opinion, American history. It's our declaration of economic independence. My fellow Americans, this is Liberation Day. April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. American steel workers, auto workers, farmers, and skilled craftsmen watched in anguish as foreign leaders have stolen our jobs, foreign cheaters have ransacked our factories, and foreign scavengers have torn apart our once beautiful American dream. Our country and its taxpayers have been ripped off for more than 50 years, but it is not going to happen anymore. We are finally putting America first. In a few moments, I will sign a historic executive order instituting reciprocal tariffs on countries throughout the world. We will supercharge our domestic industrial base. We will pry open foreign markets and break down foreign trade barriers. More production at home will mean stronger competition and lower prices. From this day on, we're not going to let anyone tell us that American workers and families cannot have the future that they deserve. We're going to produce the cars and ships, chips, airplanes, minerals, and medicines that we need right here in America. We're going to build our future with American hands, with American heart.
Welcome back. President Donald Trump has launched a sweeping new tariff initiative aimed at restoring American industry and reshaping global trade. Speaking from the White House Rose Garden, President Trump announced reciprocal tariffs on dozens of countries, including 20% on EU goods, 24% on Japan, and 34% on China, vowing to supercharge domestic manufacturing and job growth. The plan, part of Trump's Make America Wealthy Again campaign, targets both monetary and non-tariff barriers and seeks to generate $600 billion annually in revenue, according to White House trade advisors. Trump argued that for decades, unfair trade practices and foreign exploitation have harmed American workers, but the new policy would reestablish the U.S. as a global industrial powerhouse. Under the proposal, nations that impose higher trade barriers on U.S. goods will now face tariffs at roughly half those rates when exporting to the U.S. In addition to baseline tariffs, Trump announced new 25% levies on imported cars and auto parts, and tariffs on oil purchases from Venezuela. The administration says the measures will support debt reduction, lower taxes, and encourage onshoring of manufacturing. Despite pushback from international partners and concerns over rising consumer costs, the White House maintains that the policy will strengthen America's economic position. Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt has dismissed fears of a trade war, calling the strategy a return to America's historical tariff-based prosperity. The plan revives the centerpiece of Trump's economic agenda, reigniting debates over globalization and protectionism. Meanwhile, China has officially announced 34% tariff on all U.S. imports, in direct retaliation from April 10th, escalating tensions between the world's two largest economies, and signaling the most significant trade standoff since the original U.S.-China trade war during Trump's first term. Watch this.
Starting tomorrow, the United States will implement reciprocal tariffs on other nations. It's been a long time since we even thought of that. But we will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us. So the tariffs will be not a full reciprocal. I could have done that, yes, but it would have been tough for a lot of countries who didn't want to do that. I'd like to see the chart if you have it. You bring it up, Howard. This is our great Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick. Thanks, Howard. So, if you look at that, China, first row, China, 67%. That's tariffs charged to the USA, including currency manipulation and trade barriers. So 67%, I think you can, for the most part, see it. Those with good eyes, with bad eyes. We didn't want to bring, it's very windy out here. We didn't want to bring out the big charts because it had no chance of standing. Fortunately, we came armed with a little smaller chart. So 67%, so we're going to be charging a discounted reciprocal tariff of 34%. I think, in other words, they charge us, we charge them less. So how can anybody be upset? They will be, because we never charge anybody anything, but now we're going to charge. European Union, they're very tough, very, very tough traders. You know, you think of European Union, very friendly. They rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. 39%, we're going to charge them 20%, so we're charging them essentially half. Vietnam, great negotiators, great people. They like me, I like them. The problem is they charge us 90%. We're going to charge them 46% tariff. Taiwan.
There has been broad spread, I mean, far and wide commotion. I mean, the stock market saw fluctuation. We had MSNBC's primary economic reporter, Jim Cramer, prophesy Black Monday, to start off the fiscal week. And we had, of course, the negative Nancy's and the naysayers talking about how Trump would destroy the economy with this. But again, I have to point it out for the viewers at home that Trump isn't imposing tariffs on a one-way basis. These are tariffs that were imposed on America that, as he announced, he's charging a fraction back to what has been charged to us. So again, it makes you ask, how can countries without controversy be allowed to charge tariffs to the United States for decades, but the United States is now the bad guy? They're now the villain in the global economy because they're not going reciprocally, they're going based off of a fraction. It's what happens when you've been in a negative position for too long. When you try to escape that position, some people may actually make you look like the bad person for trying to get out of a situation that maybe you should have never been in instead. And of course, like President Trump has stated, the purpose of this isn't to be the villain or to destroy the global economy. It's to bring countries back to the negotiating table. He said this time and time and time again. He doesn't want the tariffs to be permanent, but he needs people to understand that he's actually willing, to use the stick. We've always said here on Loveworld USA that one of the core tenets of American doctrine, like the way President Theodore Roosevelt said, is to speak softly, but carry a big stick. And if you're a parent at home, you know that sometimes when you've spoken softly to your child, you've even spoken harshly to them at times, it's time to bring out the big stick, which is what President Trump is doing now. And just to inform the viewers at home, he mentioned Vietnam on the video. The Vietnamese officials have already reported that they are willing to lower tariffs to 0% in order to get off the tariff list with President Trump. Taiwan has reported that they're willing to lower tariffs to 0% to get off the tariff list of the United States. India has been in discussions. We've had different countries in discussions, and the Trump administration has reported that over 50 countries have reached out, to discuss tariffs. These were countries that were not reaching out before the tariffs were passed, meaning that it took Liberation Day. It took imposing these tariffs on a public stage in front of the whole world and saying that there was going to be no postponing of these, no pullbacks, to get people to finally come to the negotiating table. So again, he tried to speak softly. He mentioned this during his campaign. We were covering this all the way in February, but it took the big stick coming out. It took him playing hardball to bring people to the negotiating table. But that's what you need in a president. You need somebody willing to make the tough decisions because the country has been led amok for too long, the global economy, being the global patsy for other countries to bring in their cheaper goods and disrupt American manufacturing and disrupt American jobs and have companies from the United States offshore jobs into other countries because they know that they can get cheaper labor there due to less protected labor in those other countries. So either we jeopardize the health and the prosperity of the American workers by letting these countries, take jobs, or, by reducing labor laws in America, or we impose tariffs, we bring them back to the negotiating table, and we take things from there. President Trump is announcing and has announced to the world that America is no longer footing the bill for the economy and will instead be a partaker and not the full controller of it all. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has announced he will not run in the Democratic primary and will instead seek re-election as an independent, aiming to reclaim momentum after a challenging year that included now dismissed federal corruption charges. In a recent interview, Adams said he wants to mount a real independent campaign free from what he called the political constraints and reputational damage tied to the bribery allegations involving Turkish nationals. U.S. District Judge Dale Ho dismissed the case on Wednesday with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. Adams said the charges had handcuffed him politically, but now he's prepared to campaign uninhibited. His independent bid sets up a likely high-profile general election showdown with former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who's currently leading in early polls. A Quinnipiac University poll released shortly after Cuomo's March 1st candidacy announcement showed Cuomo with 31% support among Democrats compared to 11% for Adams, whose overall approval rating stood at just 20%. Adams criticized Cuomo during the interview, especially for supporting bail reform legislation while governor. Policies, Adams says, contributed to the rise in crime during the COVID-19 pandemic. The mayor said he will submit the required 3,750 votes signatures by May 27th to secure his place on the general election ballot. As an independent, Adams hopes to reconnect with voters and redefine his mayoral record, emphasizing that his administration was on the right track before the legal distractions. And with Mayor Eric Adams there in New York City, it's important to note how when he was kowtowing to the Democratic agenda, there was no controversy, there were no issues. Everything was fine until the mass migration floods entered New York City. And he noticed a rise in crime. He noticed that the New York City budget had pretty much changed because they had to foot the bill for hotels, for food, for social benefit programs to house these people. And when he complained, when he raised a voice against it, against the Democratic agenda, suddenly these charges that had probably been there for some time surfaced out of nowhere. And of course, as he did that, people called him a shill. They said that he was trying to placate President Trump to gain favors. But now we see that after, of course, the Trump administration did step in to help his cause, he didn't suddenly say, well, I'm moving from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. He decided to run independent, showing that it's not that he necessarily supports Republican ideals, because again and again, he's never supported Republican ideals. He just understands that not everything is black and white. You can be a Democrat, but not support mass migration of illegal immigrants into your country that is therefore jeopardizing your country's budget, your city's budget, your city's safety, and just rearranging a bunch of its infrastructure. That's not even a gray area. It's just something that's not right. But since it doesn't go with the Democratic agenda, he feels like he has to go a different way. And of course, here at Loveworld USA, we will keep you updated as the New York City mayoral race heats up between Mayor Eric Adams and former Mayor Andrew Cuomo. The U.S. Department of Agriculture is distributing $537 million in grants through its Higher Blends Infrastructure Incentive Program to support biofuel infrastructure across 29 states, covering over 540 projects. The funding aims to boost the availability of higher ethanol and biodiesel blends like E15, E85, and B20 by helping fuel stations install necessary infrastructure such as pumps and storage tanks. USDA Secretary Brooke Rollins said the investment supports domestic energy independence in rural communities, aligning with President Trump's Unleashing American Energy executive order. She highlighted its potential to create good-paying jobs, expand the biofuel market, and reduce America's reliance on foreign energy sources. The grants are also meant to protect U.S. farmers from retaliatory trade measures. The Renewable Fuels Association praised the announcement, noting that increasing the availability of renewable fuels like ethanol helps reduce costs for consumers and strengthens demand for crops like corn and soybeans. The USDA said new projects approved after Trump's return to office are among the recipients of the funding. According to the Energy Information Administration, the U.S. is projected to produce over 1 million barrels per day of ethanol in 2025. Flynn added that with the added infrastructure, ethanol blending can grow by 10% next year. The USDA's announcement reinforces a long-term strategy to enhance U.S. energy diversity, rural growth, and consumer fuel choice. Now, one interesting thing about that news, about the news that we just took, is the fact that the man of God, Pastor Chris, had spoken before, during your Loveworld sessions about how the United States government under the Biden administration was paying farmers to not grow certain crops. And this is something that was happening around the globe, but it was very concerning that in the United States, they were paying farmers millions of dollars to not grow certain crops and saying that if they continue to grow those crops, they would reduce their subsidies. Meaning that, now farmers were being restricted in what they could grow if they wanted government assistance. And of course, these are the people who put food on the tables of millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of Americans. So now it's good to see a sort of inverse of that under the Trump administration, where he's now giving farmers, the ability or even a motive to grow more crops like corn and soybean. Because of course, those are two crops that are typically heavily GMO influenced. But now under the Trump administration, he's taking that in a different light, where there have been thousands of farmers who have filed complaints across the country alleging that the United States government, was trying to infringe on their rights of what they could grow and not grow for a profit. He's now giving those farmers a reason to grow these crops for a profit that in turn benefits the American people and the energy sector. This is what we would call in the economic world the invisible hand. And what the invisible hand is for the viewers at home, it's a principle that typically, people who succeed in the economy, people who succeed in business, are people who make things that benefit the general public, that benefit the people. So, it means that as the general public are benefited, it also benefits the people who make it, which cause them to make more, which causes the general public to benefit more. And it's called the invisible hand because it's like a hand that nobody can see that drives economic prosperity in line also, of course, with the happiness and well-being of people at the same time. And this seems like an example of the invisible hand, where now as the farmers are making more of this, is going to benefit the rural communities, that may not have all of the oil pipelines, but they can get these ethanol variations, like the E15, the E85, and the B52 in their cities, in the rural communities, for less than it would cost to move fuel from elsewhere into those areas. And the farmers who are also there now get benefits because now they can grow crops that are typically easier to grow, knowing that there's going to be a market for them. We will be right back with more news. Be sure to stay tuned.
The countdown to the Lord's soon return has begun, and in this first quarter of the year of completeness, Loveworld USA has indeed been spreading and preaching the gospel of our Lord Jesus, preparing the hearts of billions around the world to expect the Lord.
This year, we will complete the full preaching of the gospel in all nations.
Loveworld USA broadcasted life-changing programs with our man of God. Global Communion Service, Your Loveworld Specials, Global Day of Prayer, Healing Streams, Loveworld News, where we emphasize truth and deception. Truth Watch USA, where Americans are exposed to the truth. Topics such as the failed agenda of so-called globalists, what's really happening to your food, President Trump, a sign to the church. Prayer programs where effective prayers were offered. Tremendous Power, Pray for America, faith-filled programs like I'm Just Saying, Pastor Chris Worth reading, Stick to the Word, programs with Pastor Benny, and many more. We say thank you, dearest partners, for contributing towards our programming and daily operations through your partnership. Loveworld USA is positioned for a massive harvest of souls all around the world as we set our sail to reach more people in this second quarter, in more languages, and change more lives. This is a call to our dearest partners all over the world to join this mandate in completing the full preaching of the gospel to all nations as you sponsor our 2025 projects. 1. Pastor Chris in 1 Billion Homes Project. Ensure the spread of the message of the man of God through Loveworld USA. The spread of our ministry programs and agenda through satellite, cable, internet, digital, mobile apps, Alpha TV, OTT platforms, our news, and our current affairs. 2. Minutes to Reach Billions 4.0. Make your every minute count for the gospel as we spread the awareness of Loveworld USA to your world. 3. Translation of our language-specific channels. Make it possible for billions around the world to watch our programs in their native language. 4. Tag your name to a program. Sponsor and tag your name to our various Loveworld USA programs. You can adopt a specific program. 5. Studio upgrade. Join us today with your lavish gift to the work of Loveworld USA. Every SPs or dollar you give goes to accomplishing our mandate to fully preach the gospel with our life-transforming content. For more information, please call the number showing on your screen. God bless you.
Welcome back. Senate Republicans voted 52 to 48 on Thursday to advance debate on a sweeping budget resolution designed to fast-track President Donald Trump's economic agenda. The proposal includes major tax cuts, increased military and immigration enforcement spending, and a $5 trillion debt limit hike, all likely to significantly raise the federal deficit. All Republicans but Senator Rand Paul from Kentucky supported the measure, while Democrats unanimously opposed it. The blueprint, backed by President Trump and Senate GOP leadership, paves the way for permanent extensions of the 2017 tax cuts, along with $1.5 trillion in additional tax reductions, potentially including the president's proposal to eliminate taxes on tipped wages. It also proposes $175 billion in new immigration enforcement funding and a $150 billion increase in defense spending. Republicans intend to pass the final package using the budget reconciliation process, bypassing the Senate's 60-vote threshold and excluding Democrats from the final vote. Democrats, led by Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, plan to offer amendments during the 50-hour debate window to highlight what they call a budget that benefits billionaires at the expense of working families. Senator Elizabeth Warren accused Republicans of promoting an economy that works for a handful of billionaires and lets everybody else eat dirt. The vote marked the first formal step in a process that could reshape federal tax and spending policy, with Democrats aiming to force Republicans into politically difficult votes while the GOP pushes to deliver on Trump's promises of economic expansion and immigration control. A final Senate vote on the resolution is expected over the weekend. Let's take a look.
This resolution is the first step toward a final bill to make permanent the tax relief we implemented in 2017 and deliver a transformational investment in our border, national and energy security, all accompanied by substantial savings measures and common sense reforms to our government.
Some of the highlights of the resolution include earmarking roughly $175 billion for new border security, $150 billion in defense spending, raising the debt ceiling by $5 trillion, identifying at least $4 billion in government spending cuts, making 2017 tax cuts permanent using accounting that makes the cost $0. But Democratic leader Chuck Schumer accuses Republicans of fudging the tax numbers and adds it will create an economic disaster.
If they go through current policy baseline, it will increase the deficit on the United States by $30 trillion, virtually doubling it. And who's going to pay the price? Us, our children, our grandchildren.
Republicans who worked on the resolution disagree.
We're using what's called current policy so that we make sure that these tax cuts are permanent. That is vital, not only for investment long term, but you'll see more growth and more revenue, which actually helps close the deficit and debt.
Republicans add the increased funding for our military is critical to national security.
So being able to find another $150 billion to plus up our defense budget at a time when so much is required of us, I think it's a winning formula.
We need to get something good passed before Easter. I think the American people are getting restless. They want to see us deliver. We've done a lot of good things with a razor-thin majority, but, enough. It's time to deliver, and I think that's...
Again, this is a winning sign for the American people. And to kind of elaborate more on what this means, what the Senate Republicans trying to push this through quickly, this is being treated not as a new bill, but as a continuation of the tax cuts of 2017, which is why they can bypass some of the methods that typically a new tax bill would have to go through. Since Trump passed it in 2017, while he was still in office, it wasn't set to expire until 2025, which gives him the ability, and the Senate Republicans the ability, to just treat this as an extension instead of them bringing a new bill into office entirely. And of course, some of the things that that bill did do in 2017 was the fact that it reduced for all brackets, it brought down the tax percentage. So for example, some brackets went from 14% to 12%. The highest bracket went from 39.6% to 37%. It also capped the SALT deductions, that's state and local tax, at $10,000 annually, which is great for those high income tax states like California, like Vermont, like New York. What it also did was that it also doubled the estate tax limit from around $5 million to around $11 million. And what an estate tax means is that typically if you were to inherit an estate, the government at a certain limit of the estate, anything under, before the 2017 tax cuts, anything under $5.8 million was you could take tax-free. Anything above that, they were taking 40%. So it's one of those situations, where again, it's more of the government trying to dip hands into the pockets of the American people. And then, you have the fiscally conservative Republicans trying to reduce how much money the government can take, which is another reason why President Trump is trying to find other ways to bring money into the government's coffers through things like tariffs instead, which will now aim to curtail the way the deficit would grow when these tax cuts do get passed. So now President Trump is trying to pass the buck from the American taxpayers to the global economy, instead of relying on the American taxpayers to subsidize the global economy. And you wonder why some people, would have an issue against it. I mean, one of the critical things that, he stated, Howard Lutnick has stated, is that the president wants to get rid of income tax for people making under or $150,000. He also wants to remove tax on overtime and tipped wages. And you still have people complaining about that. But these are things that affect the basic Americans. These are things that affect about 70 to 80% of Americans, living in this country. So these are wide sweeping reforms, whether you support them or not. If you work as a server, if you work overtime, if you make under $150,000, which the vast majority of American people do, this benefits you. And you can still go out and protest after, while receiving the benefits, while paying less in taxes. But for some reason, the Democrats will acknowledge how much the deficit will grow, while they grew the deficit greatly under Joe Biden and his rescue plan from COVID-19, and while they allowed other countries to disrupt the American manufacturing economy by imposing all of these tariffs. But of course, with President Trump, there's a different way that we're taking the approach, and the approach is to benefit the American people. We'll see how this goes. District Judge James Boasberg has signaled that he may hold the Trump administration in contempt over its decision to deport Venezuelan nationals, despite a court order temporarily halting removals under the 1798 Alien Enemies Act. During a 10th hearing, Boasberg questioned whether deportation flights carried out on March 15th were in violation of the court's emergency injunction, stating that the government's actions appeared to have been taken in bad faith. The administration has defended the deportations, citing national security and asserting compliance with the court's orders. However, government lawyers declined to disclose key details about the flights, including whether they took off after the injunction was issued. Deputy Assistant Attorney General Drew Ensign faced repeated inquiries about who knew what and when, including whether flight operations had begun before the court ruling was shared with relevant agencies. Boasberg pressed for transparency, asking Ensign to name officials who were informed about the order and whether any actions were taken prior to the ruling that could suggest prior planning. The judge openly questioned why unclassified information had not been shared, raising concerns about the government's refusal to provide it under state secrets protections. At one point, he described the government's response as pretty sketchy. The judge said he would issue a ruling on the potential contempt finding as early as next week. The hearing comes amid ongoing legal challenges to the administration's use of the Alien Enemies Act, which has drawn criticism from civil rights groups and sparked renewed debate over executive authority in immigration enforcement. Watch this.
Court battle continuing Thursday here in D.C. over the White House's deportation flights to El Salvador. Federal Judge James Boasberg pressing the administration for answers over whether it defied a court order when it deported hundreds of migrants to El Salvador last month. Deportation flights continued this week despite another district judge's order for them to stop. Trump has justified the removals with a more than 200-year-old law that allows non-citizens to be deported without a court proceeding. The hearing comes as the administration faces scrutiny over its immigration tactics. Last week, the Justice Department admitted it wrongly deported a Maryland man with protected legal status. The White House says they have no plans to return him to the U.S.
This was unquestionably an illegal alien. This was unquestionably a person who broke the laws to get into our country. This is unquestionably a person an immigration judge had found had zero right to be in the United States of America.
Attorneys for Kilmar Abrego Garcia deny he has any gang ties and accuse the administration of acting recklessly and ignoring due process.
This is a situation where the Trump administration and the Republicans, especially in the Senate, have been talking about ways to solve this, the issue of these different district judges and federal judges being able to pass injunctions that affect the whole country, and considering whether it's time to pass a bill that may instead just allow them to affect the areas that they have been elected to affect. So for example, you can have a district judge, and we have things in America like, called the circuits. So there are different areas, where each judge can represent. So you can have a district judge in Texas, you can have a district judge in New York, you can have a district judge in Maryland. And the thing is that if one district judge passes a ruling or passes an injunction on an executive order, that affects the entire country, although their primary elected purpose is inside of that state. So that's something that the Republicans in the Senate have been looking at fixing. But to specifically address the matter at hand, this is a situation where the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, thanked President Trump greatly, for returning these people back to El Salvador so that they could atone for the crimes that they committed in El Salvador and, of course, the crimes that, that they committed in the United States. Again, these are members of the Tren de Aragua gang, the prison variation of MS-13, Mara Salvatrucha 13, one of the most notorious, if not the most notorious gang in South America. So when you have the president of a country that's receiving them, grateful for taking prisoners, unlike South Sudan, who refused the deportation flights, you have somebody who's grateful for taking these people, who even publicly on social media posted a post of confusion as to why Judge Boasberg was trying to attack the Trump administration for returning them. It almost makes you wonder, why is this Judge Boasberg so against the criminals going back to their countries when both countries involved are happy, are pleased about the situation? I mean, what benefit does it serve to let people, known members of the Tren de Aragua gang, who were the people that were specifically targeted, remain in this country any longer? That's for, of course, James Boasberg and his agenda, to have in mind, and here, for the people who live on the side of common sense to find out. And now, let's take a look at the weather update. And to end the news today, a quick recap of the headlines. April declared the month of favors. U.S. revoked South Sudan visas in retaliation for deportation refusals, citing national security concerns. Protests erupt nationwide as thousands rally against Trump and Musk in the hands-off movement. Iran's currency crashes to record low amid Trump's renewed sanctions and regional tension. And that's News Plus for today. Remember to join us same time tomorrow for more. I'm TGK Andre. Good night and God bless you.